The foundational challenge is not having a clear and understood definition of the ideal client profile, the personas, and how you solve those problems. And most engagements I have with B2B sales teams, like, they all start with, what's the best tool, Mark? What's the silver bullet?
Mark Colgan. Mark is a B2B sales consultant working in the industry for over 15 years now. He's been an advisor, a consultant, a coach, a trainer across all aspects of the sales industry, helping SDRs primarily to improve themselves.
Organizations leveraging AI and are using it to free up reps' times are the ones that are seeing the biggest impact. And I think very few organizations have that consistent behavior-based call reviews, for example. It seems to be like, put people on the pip, see if they work it out. If not, we'll get rid of them. But without clear standards and frameworks and support, most reps won't succeed and won't get past their challenges if you don't have that constant feedback.
What is the best piece of coaching advice that you've ever received in your career?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about the one single, silver bullet bit of coaching advice. So I thought of a couple of things that I find myself repeating to myself over and over again, 15 years after I first heard them. So the first one is, and I think this is really useful for the setting of sales reps and SDRs who I work a lot with, is they don't know what they don't know. And it takes a little while for that to sink in. But what I really mean by that is, when you are a sales rep and you have a script that you're supposed to be following and there's questions that you're supposed to be asking, whether you're doing band qualification or any other type of qualification, you get to a point in the call where it kind of goes off the rails a little bit, and then you get a little bit flustered and a little bit worried. But you have to remember that that prospect doesn't know what you were supposed to ask them in the first place. So they don't know that you messed up. So the best thing that you can do in that situation is just kind of carry on the conversation with a little bit of confidence, and you can kind of always jump back and ask those questions. I think reps look at scripts and they think they have to ask these questions in a sequential order. But again, the prospect doesn't know that. So if you miss something, there's always an opportunity to go back to it. And that kind of helps you stop overthinking things, which is one of the challenges that I think we all face, whether you're in sales or not. Another one, this is more of a more life-based rather than just for selling. But I once heard that everything you want in life is on the other side of fear. And I think fear holds us back both professionally and personally. So I think that's something to really keep in mind. If you're feeling nervous about something, or maybe you're doubting yourself, and I go through this myself on a weekly, daily basis. I just ask myself, is it fear that's holding me back? Am I worried about coming across as stupid or incompetent or whatever it might be? And then the last one, I had one of my favorite managers I ever worked with was ex-military, but he's an incredible guy. And I'll mention him, I guess, a few times throughout my answers. But one of the things that I learned from him were assumptions are the mother of all fuck-ups. And you can understand, coming from a military background, why you don't want to be assuming things, especially in the field. So never assume. And if you think that somebody is going to do something for you or someone's going to reply, whether you're working in a team or with a prospect, for example, just double check that they are going to do the thing that you think they're going to do. And I think this really evolves into managing expectations, which again, from a sales and a personal point of view, is something that you should make a real conscious effort to do. Especially when you're working with different teams, different prospects, different cultures, different time zones. Just never assume and always confirm the next steps.
I mean, we're going to jump ahead a little bit rather than going through the usual question, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and something that I've had so many conversations about, is this idea that coaching and training and essentially support and assistance comes to you at a much later time in your sales career than perhaps it should. These executives, higher level members of staff are receiving all this coaching and work perks and things like that. But actually, like you said, it's entry level staff, SDRs and things. They don't know what they don't know. So how do you help them know more? It's providing that coaching and that framework. Is that something that you've seen in your work? Who kind of requires the most guidance, and how can we kind of start to balance those scales a little bit more within the industry?
Yeah, I think like the simple and logical reason why the execs get the coaching first is because their mistakes and fuck ups have a bigger impact than the entry level roles, and I think
Mm.
that's why perhaps there is that executive coaching, and also yeah, the impact that they have of getting something right or wrong is far greater. But that doesn't mean that the entry level or people who are new in their career don't need the coaching and don't need the training. They certainly do. And I think everybody could benefit from a coach, and whether that's coaching from a sales and a skill point of view, or even like a therapist. I think we could all admit that we could all do with a bit of therapy. Um, but the most important thing is the openness to change and willingness to learn. Because you can be a competent rep that has a gap in your skills, but if you're not willing to be vulnerable and listen to where you can improve, then it's not going to make any difference for you. Like the world that I operate in, specifically with sales development reps, they're typically, quote unquote, young or new to the role of selling, or new to the role of selling in that market and that industry. Um, and there's a lot of things that they don't know, and this comes down to those unknown unknowns. And when there are a lot of unknown unknowns in your life, it can feel nerve wracking, and you can feel anxious, and that's never a great position to be approaching work with or from. And I think there's two recent examples of some reps that I coached recently, that I'll share with you now. One of the reps that I was working with was pronouncing the name of the company slightly incorrectly, and it sounded like a rude word that they were saying. And then when they were following up after introducing the company, they asked, "Have you heard of us?" And it just put the prospect in a corner, and the rep in the corner as well, because then they had to kind of defend and fight their way out of that corner. So they were following the script, but their tonality and the way they were pronouncing it was incorrect. So you need to have an element of human coaching alongside the technology to help kind of pull out these things. Because from a tech point of view, the AI would have said they were following the script, they were saying the right thing, but it was the way that they pronounced it. And then another example I think of, and again, I'm not naming any names or companies here, but one of the reps said that sales development reps said that they were really struggling with just organizing their time because they have ADHD. I don't know if it was self-diagnosed or they had the diagnosis, but that's what they said they were struggling with.
Mhm.
So what I worked on with him was less about the cold call openers or how to write an email, but more about how to structure their day. So what we introduced was at the beginning and end of every day, they just did a 10 to 15 minute recap of what they did, what they still have outstanding, and what their priorities are for the next day. And that could be building the prospect list for the next day of cold calling. It could be the follow up emails that they have to write or actually execute on that day. And then also updating the reporting sheet. That was something that he was getting in trouble with, is that he wasn't sharing the numbers when he should have done. So we made sure that was almost like a non negotiable for him. And then the other thing that for him specifically was to help him time block his day. Do all LinkedIn activities in one window, do all cold calling in another window. And that might sound quite basic advice for some people if they've already been doing time blocking, but a lot of reps don't. And a lot of sales organizations don't enforce time blocking as well. And I think there has to be an element of adding some structure into the workday. So yeah, long-winded way of answering. The execs have a bigger impact of the right or wrong decisions, but the if you don't have that coaching at the entry level, you're missing out on potential marginal gains across an entire sales force.
Yeah, it's that difference between the people in the trenches and the people flying in the plane overhead, taking a look at what's going on and going, that both of them can't work without each other, but both of them sometimes need support from outside. Is there a specific kind of piece of advice that you find yourself continually having to give teams repeatedly? Like, is there kind of one thing that sits as a bit of an umbrella?
Yeah, I think most again, thinking through the lens of the SDRs, it's book a meeting from a meeting, and it's just the number one thing that they can do. So BAM FAM is the acronym, and it's you're usually comped or at least targeted on meetings booked, and the amount of times that a call goes well or kind of okay, and they agree to a meeting, and then you send, okay, I'll send an email with a follow up and a calendar link for the AE, if they're booking it for AEs, and those meetings just never get booked. So it's about being able to control the conversation on the call and get that calendar event sent across, even if it's just a placeholder calendar. It doesn't have to say anything. Just get it in their calendar and ask them to confirm that they've received it. If we're talking about AEs, for example, and they've already got a calendar appointment, so this is the first kind of discovery call, but they're going to do a demo or a proposal call. I always like to say, because time zones are really hard to work out these days as well. We're selling for, I'm in the UK time zone, selling to San Francisco, for example. I might say, the call today, what time did the call start for you? And they might say 11 a.m. And I say, great. How about same time on Thursday? And then I'll just move the calendar appointment across that we had used to have the call that we were having in that moment. So that's one way of just reducing a lot of friction and steps. And then, of course, you can always update the information in that calendar invite, change the description after. So that one would be like a tactical bit of advice. And then again, and a lot of the people I work with are new to role and they are new to selling. So one other bit of advice I say is to know your numbers. This comes back to that military manager that I had. Again, great guy. I don't have a bad word to say about him, but taught me a lot. Know Understand what your monthly targets are and then break those down into weekly targets so they're more digestible, and then have daily targets as well, because 20 meetings, qualified meetings a month sounds a lot, but it's 5 a week. Five a week is just more than one a day, so all you have to do is book one meeting every day. It doesn't sound as bad. And then I always recommend that never take your foot off the pedal when you've hit target. Always assume that some meetings are going to cancel. So try and give yourself a 10 or 20% buffer. Um, and then from a management point of view, if I think back to my career, so I started off my career in sales in recruitment, which is very much boiler room, pick up the phone, smile and dial, high volume, calling all sorts of companies. And in fact, I was even going to business parks in the East Midlands and knocking at the door and walking into reception. So the original cold calling or door to door. One of my colleagues at the time was useless with his numbers, and it would frustrate the hell out of our manager that he could never give what his numbers were. So how many CVs he'd sent out, how many meetings he'd booked, how many roles he had open live. And I just saw that interaction, and I could see the frustration in that manager having that conversation with him. So I always made sure that I knew my numbers. And by knowing my numbers, it sounded like I knew what I was doing, which gave me a little bit of space, I guess. And then related to that, in that experience, and then also I've managed teams of people as well, is don't if there's a problem or you're struggling with something, always come forward with a potential solution, even if that solution isn't the right answer. That's okay. It just shows your workings out. A bit like we used to have to do at school, is show the workings out of how we got to the answer, because nothing signifies kind of incompetence than someone who just always has a problem and never has an answer. And I think from a career development point of view, you want to be seen as the person who's proactive and you suggest ideas, rather than the person who's a problem and is always asking for help. Because there's nothing wrong with asking for help. It's the way that you frame it. And I think the last bit of advice is, unless you are a surgeon, you're selling medical devices that build like heart valves in replacement hearts, no one's going to die. And no one will die. It's absolutely okay. The worst case scenario isn't that someone's going to die. There's other things that are going to happen, but it's not life or death. And none of this really matters. I think is at a macro, it really doesn't. So, but it's so hard to see that and feel that when you're in it, and when you're behind target or you're not hitting quota, there's pips happening left and right. It's very hard, but it's not life or death.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, that's, yeah. Me and my friends just say it's not that deep. It's not that deep. Like, don't, whatever it is, broader. But something else you said is, again, something I've really been thinking about a lot through like my own journey as well. But so Emmett, our founder, at Pitstop, he says it regularly. He's like, solutions, not problems, solutions, not problems. And that can sometimes be taken in the wrong way, but I think you summed it up in the right way of it's not about having the answer. It's just about having the openness to try and find that answer rather
Yeah,
than just being like, this is an issue and leaving it there.
yeah,
And actually, and for me as well, I've slowly learned over the last couple of years working with Emmett, but also just, as I gain more experience in my career and life, it's, you're never really going to look stupid by having a potential solution, even if that solution is shit
hmm
and doesn't work. At least you're trying to put a point on the board. At least you're trying to contribute in some way or another. It, is that a mindset you find people don't have, especially younger people? And how can you kind of go about, whether this is sales leader or your own experience or anything, like how can you go about empowering those younger members of the team, the SDRs and stuff, to try and think a bit more like that? I guess growth mindset is the best way to say it,
yeah.
and feel empowered to not worry about looking stupid, but just actually, here's an idea.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're not going to die if you suggest something that is stupid. So I think remember that. There's twofold to this answer. I think one, culturally, it has to come from the organization that you work in. There has to be a safe environment to fail and fail fast. And quite a lot of startups might say that, but whether or not their directors truly live by that is a different thing. But yeah, having that culture of it's okay to make mistakes. There's no such thing as stupid questions. When I ran a couple of agencies and had in one agency 100 people, the other agency was 20 odd people. One of our core values was, in looser terms, was there's no such thing as stupid questions. So don't ever be afraid of coming forward and suggesting something or asking a question, as long as you've shown what you've done so far. I think if that culture doesn't exist, then we have to play with the ego, or we have to play to the ego of the management and the directors. So if I was a rep in a company that didn't seem like they had that openness to making mistakes and asking silly questions, I would frame it as, here's the challenge, here's what I've done so far. But from your experience, Mr. Director, who's got so many more years of working in this and has seen this time and time again, what would you suggest? Or from your experience, what have you seen working in the past? And that just kind of butters up the person you're asking that question, makes them feel a bit good. You kind of recognize their status, and then they're usually a bit more open to helping because they feel like they're imparting their wisdom and knowledge. So that could be one little tip.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's true. But butter them up a bit. That's a good phrase.
Yeah.
Speaking of, buttering up, let's go back to the kind of the beginning of a journey. That kind of idea of outbound and inbound, and our inboxes. I had experience with this earlier this week around just the amount of spam and shit. And I mean, we'll get onto AI after this, but
Mhm.
it we're just receiving more and more in our inbox than ever before. What can organizations, teams, people do? Because I know this is a bit of a specialized area of yours. What
Yeah.
what can what can people do to try and kind of stand out a little bit in that area?
Yeah, so it's very fair to say that the inbox is noisy. There's more
Yep.
noise than ever, and a lot of AI slop noise causing more. Um, but throughout the noise, you can still cut through with relevance and making sure that your message is relevant to the prospect you're reaching out to. One of the things I say in the training that I deliver for B2B sales teams is, you can't sell car insurance to somebody who doesn't have a. So if you're trying to push a solution onto somebody who doesn't have that problem, they're never going to buy from you. And funny story, I've always used that as an example because I didn't own a car. I moved recently outside of the city centre and I did need to buy a car, and I had no one to go and find car insurance from. So I'm going to have to rework my analogy there. But yeah, so I think, how do we cut through the noise with relevance? What do we mean by relevance? And I think a lot of reps default, and it's not their fault sometimes from the management, to personalize. Mention something you saw on their LinkedIn profile about the university they went to 20 years ago. Look at their interests and that they follow a charity and talk about that. And that just doesn't work. It's almost quite gimmicky. It can work, it can add, but it's not what you should kind of lean into. So really what we're trying to establish here to cut through the noise is to demonstrate to the prospect that you're reaching out to that you understand their problem, that you have worked on solutions to similar problems with other companies like them. And if we could distill it down into a formula, that's it. It's you understand the problem, you potentially have a solution, but you don't know because everybody's problem is unique. And you've worked with other companies like them who look like they had the same problem, and now their world is much better because they worked with you and your team. And that really comes down to understanding your ideal client profiles or ideal customer profiles and the personas, and then what are the challenges each individual has within those organizations that they work in. Um, and then because email is as a channel is very busy, then you really do have to go multi-channel, whether that be phone calls, whether that be LinkedIn, whether that be other kind of mediums like video and voice notes as well. If you look at your LinkedIn inbox and see how many kind of pitch slaps you've got, how many of those were voice notes? And I think most people would say that they don't receive many voice notes at all. So I would lean into sending voice notes. But on that, again, to go another level, I worked with a team that had 12 SDRs. One SDR was doing fantastic with booking meetings on voice notes, but she loved it. She loved the sound of her own voice, and she would admit that herself. So she had so much energy, the right tone, the right patter, and they really, really worked for her. But then they asked all SDRs to leave voice notes for people, and it didn't work. It just didn't translate because they weren't the individual SDRs weren't leaning into the kind of their strengths. And some people really struggled with the voice notes, and they felt forced, and it sounded forced as well. So I think it is a mixture of finding out what works for you and the kind of the medium and channel, but then doubling down on those that do work.
That's so interesting about the voice note thing as well, because I imagine there's a certain percentage, and this is I got a guy called Richard Harris on.
Oh yeah,
he was two weeks ago now. By the time this goes out, he's based in the States, and he was talking a lot about this idea of authenticity and injecting a little bit of your personality into it, but also his biggest piece of advice was speak 25% less. Let it breathe, let them talk. It's very easy, and like you said, that person, the girl, loves the sound of her own voice, but it sounds like she struck that balance and found a way to make her authentic self work for her. But then as soon as the company put that on everyone else, well, they're like, hang on a minute, I don't like talking. I like emailing and things. And then suddenly you sound nervous and awkward and things. And again, what Richard said was, be in terms of talking 25% less, his was kind of like, get to the point where, like, am I trying to am I flogging a dead cat here, or whatever the phrase is?
Yeah.
Have I led the horse to war? Or does it actually want to drink? And then
Yeah.
that 25% less applied to that in terms of being like, look, we're not for each other. Let's not worry about this. I'll see you later. And then jumping on to the next one. So it's kind of, I guess it's twofold. So I realize, Mark, maybe I'm waffling now, but
That's okay.
it's like finding your authentic self and how you can kind of do it, but also paying attention while you're in that call and doing that meeting or whatever it is, and realizing actually we're not gelling here. They're not, because a lot of people hate voice notes, don't they? And they don't want to respond to it or listen to it. They're like, I don't, it feels unsolicited almost.
Yeah.
But there will be that percentage of people that are the opposite way. And they're like, actually, I love this. I'd rather have this as an email. And then you realize you narrow down and you find that ICP within the ICP of like, actually, my best way of doing it is this ICP, but people who enjoy listening to voice notes and communicate better that way instead,
And unfortunately, AI can't predict yet which channel people prefer.
Exactly,
Not yet. May give it a few months. The way things are developing, it might be able to suggest it. I'm a big fan of Richard Harris, and I do like his element. The 25% less is great, and then also the human element of it, and that's something I'm doubling down on a lot this year because. Yes, there's AI tools, there's AI coaching, there's this, there's that, but still selling is a human to human experience in most cases still. And I always try and sprinkle the human element into pretty much everything I do, every interaction. So I understand that I'm in a unique position. I run my own business, so I have a little bit more control about what I can do. But if you were to book a meeting with me, you get forwarded to a thank you page where there's a picture of me as a child model advertising children's diarrhea tablets. Just completely random, but I thought, fuck it, why not? Like, I want to work with really interesting people and people that kind of I vibe with. So like, let me sprinkle some of that in. And another example is when you not wait for me, like I'm an important person, but sometimes I'm on back-to-back Zoom calls. So you join my Zoom waiting room and I've got an AI version of me doing a Rick roll. And I just used AI to superimpose a photo of me doing the Rick Roll song, Never Gonna Give You Up. again, typical standard SDRs are not going to be allowed to that much creativity and freedom.
Mhm.
So one bit of advice I'd share is to like, I try and collect stories and like I call these nuggets because I can't think of a better way to explain it. But what they are is they're little elements that I can use in my communication that just make me sound less like a salesperson. So some examples are I went to a lot of the base around traveling, actually, which I appreciate that not everybody likes to travel. But I was in North Carolina for a Techstars accelerator, and I went to an NC State American football college game. And I tailgated. I had a few beers with the students. I way older than I should have been, but I was enjoying the tailgating experience. Never done it before, and the British accent definitely helped.
Mm.
So whenever I see some of these in North Carolina, I will mention Go Wolfpack, which I think is the name, the mascot of the team. And I was like, had a great time tailgating with the NC State college football team. If it's Boston, where I went for a conference, I first tried Korean fried chicken for the first time ever, and it changed my life. I mention that in my
Right.
PS, or I might drop it at the end of a voice note. Um, Sandy, I went to Nottingham Trent University. There's a rivalry with the Uni of Nottingham. So if I ever see that, that's something else. So I'm constantly looking for these little dots that I can connect, and most of them are lived and past experience. Which,
Mm.
as I approach 40, I appreciate that there's 20 odd years of knowledge for those stories, but there are still things that you can pull out when you are younger or newer in your career that you can connect these dots with people and just put that human element in.
It's like you said, you don't want to do it to the point where it's a gimmick, but it's also okay to inject it so that you do, for lack of a better term, like sieve out people that realistically you're not going to vibe with. And I guess you can find a fine line, if your name isn't on the door and you are still having to wear a suit and tie and, go and play the game and suck up to
Mm-hmm.
the boss. I guess there still is a way, because ultimately, I'm going to keep coming back to this, like, you're not going to die, mate. And
Yeah.
also, I would imagine if you are putting up the numbers and you're booking the calls and that all looks good, surely the decision makers probably aren't going to care in the method in which you're doing it, as long as you're remaining professional, of course.
Yeah. I always say don't do anything that your grandmother would be unhappy about reading about you in the news. Like,
That's a
so
good measure.
to avoid race, religion, politics, avoid these kind of taboo subjects, keep it very, very safe. And if anything, be more safe than you would be in the pub with your friends after 2 pints. But yeah, play it safe and keep it professional. But I think the key here is we're not leading with this. When you lead with that type of personalization, it becomes a gimmick. When it supports the message and you're articulating that you understand the pain that they're in and you may have a solution for it, and then it's a supporting function, that's where it can really help. But never force it. You don't have to crowbar it in. And something you mentioned is that you're not going to vibe with everybody, and I agree. Um, but there are plenty of times where I have moved forward with a purchasing decision, even though I didn't particularly vibe with the person, but they had the best solution for my problem. I got married the other year, and the wedding planners were, for someone who's a very type A and very organized, and my wife would say OCD. I disagree. My way is just the right way. No, the wedding planners were incredibly frustrating for me to work with, and I think culturally we're planning it in abroad. Not use if it was the UK, it might have been different. Um, but we still went with them. We still had a fantastic wedding and experience at the end of the day. But I went back to managing expectations. I made them give me a list and a checklist of things that we'd agreed on, which things we still had to make decisions on. I kind of managed that part of it. Again, that's probably where the OCD comment comes in. But yeah, so you don't have to vibe with everybody. But if you genuinely have the one of the best solutions to the problem, you can still get through to the next part of the sales process, which might be handing off to an AE, even if you didn't vibe with somebody. But you're not going to vibe with everybody, and yeah, it's not life or death.
Talking about systems and kind of handing that down and things like that. Where is it that you see, in your experience, on both sides of the fence, do you see kind of teams, organizations kind of breaking down when it comes to execution and performance and I hate using all these jargon words, but synergy. Where do you see most of the time that breakdown occurring?
So I think the foundational challenge is not having a clear and understood definition of the ideal client profile, the personas,
Mhm.
and how you solve those problems. And it's so funny. Most engagements I have with B2B sales teams, I work with like seed to Series D, is a real big range, but they all have. They all start with what's the best tool, Mark? What's the silver bullet that's going to make each one of my reps book and hit 200% of their quota? And I, tongue in cheek, will turn around and say, before I give you the magic tool, I want you to define who your ideal client profile is. And if there's two people in that meeting, I want them both to define it. And if they can't say it succinctly and the same, then I say we're not talking about tools until we get the ICP and the persona agreed upon. And it's funny how much I turn into like a mediator in some of these calls of just trying to get people on the same page.
Mm.
So it's that discipline around we understand the types of companies and the people within those companies, and then what challenges those people have in those companies and in the market that they serve. Because you could be selling a solution to VPs of marketing, but one works in financial services, the other works in HR, the other works in, the other one works in technology, the other one works in an agency. They have unique issues and challenges that your product could solve, but you need to tailor your message to those. The other one is, I'd say probably activity over strategy. I think the simplest and laziest answer is like just increase your numbers. And there is an element of truth to that tactic. So if you do more, you'll get more. But so many organizations, they measure volume, like calls made, emails sent, obviously demos booked, but they don't measure the quality of those conversations. And look, I've been there as a BDR. There's been certain people that I'd book a meeting with knowing that they weren't going to close. They weren't going to proceed through the sales process. There were numbers that I could call to increase my talk time. Yeah, I did it. And like most VPs of sales, if they started as an individual contributor, probably did some of these same things too. So how can you expect that your team of 20 SDRs, there's not going to be one person doing something similar to that? I really wish that more sales departments used quality conversations as a leading indicator. The more quality conversations reps can have in a macro, the more meetings will be booked eventually. But we can't control if somebody's ready to buy now or not.
Mhm.
But somebody might be ready to buy in 3 months' time. So if you can get that information and you have a good system to store that information, and then you're disciplined with your follow up, you can call when the timing is right, because only 3% of your market are actively buying, 7% are open to looking. That means 90% just aren't. They're not in market. That car insurance example, had a car insurance company reached out to me, said we offer the best car insurance policies for expats living in Portugal, for example, I'd be like, okay, that's me. Not now, but I may need car insurance in the future, and I'd reach back out to Pedro. And then the last thing is, well, not the last thing, but one of the other things as well is not having that feedback loop. And I think very few organizations have that consistent behavior based call reviews, for example. It seems to be like put people on the pip, see if they work it out. If not, we'll get rid of them. But without having that feedback, which is tied specifically to the challenges that individual rep is having, and then not coaching that rep on an ongoing basis to improve. I understand that's hard, by the way. It's not saying it's an easy thing to do, but without like clear standards and frameworks and support, most reps won't succeed and won't get past their challenges if you don't have that constant feedback loop.
So you've done my work for me there. That's the clip of Pit Stop, and what we do is solving that problem. And but it's really interesting. So a statistic that we actually, it's kind of become our banner of like, this is the issue that we're solving, is less than 1% of sales calls are recorded and reviewed. You know, like which when you think about it, you said there about volume, and that's just such a blunt instrument when it comes to doing this, because as well, if you do have, the example you gave of, right, they don't need it now, but in 3 months' time, let's revisit it. If all you're doing is increasing and stacking volume, trying to have a system where you have the ability to easily find that and revisit in 3 months makes it impossible. Because if that's one of 100, like that's already, you've got to sift through and find it. If that's one of 1,000, it's just going to get lost in the fog of war.
Yeah, I with the technology that exists today, not naming any name of a particular platform to record your calls, there's no excuse that you're not calling, you're not recording those calls, even at a fundamental level. just thinking of some of the benefits of having call recording, it helps you surface objections or common objections that keep coming up. Helps you understand what customer stories convert as well. A lot of the work I do with SDRs is I talk about solution bridging. It's kind of like gap selling, which is one of the sales methodologies, but there's a problem and then there's a solution, and then your job is to build the bridge to that solution. And usually you do that by explaining how other companies like them did it. So um, being able to practice and see which ones resonate the most. So yeah, I think if they're not collecting that information and then looking at training points of how they can coach their teams to be better, then they're massively missing out on some real low hanging fruit. And of course, like, no one's saying that a technology can solve 100% of the problems, but if they're doing none of that and it can solve 80% of the problems, then isn't that better to be solving at least 80% of the problems than none? Um, and then from an organizational point of view, if you step back a little bit and you've got many reps who are having conversations, what message is landing? What's resonate? What pain points are really working at the moment? And how do we feed that back into marketing so our marketing initiatives can build more around those talking points and talk tracks? So yeah, I think it impacts both the personal and the company level.
Had an author on a few weeks ago called Richard Blundell. He wrote a book. That's a long title. The GTM Handbook for B2B SaaS Businesses, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. And our founder Emmett read it and was like, "This is the Bible." He absolutely loves it. So we got Richard on the podcast, and Richard said something really interesting. He was like, "Don't just focus on the pain point in terms of the stone in their shoe. Focus on the nail in their foot, because often the problem that they're thinking about isn't actually the problem. Sometimes there's a deeper problem that you can consider. And as you said, then once you figured that out, it almost reverse engineers back to the ICP, which then can engineer back the other way towards marketing, and suddenly it all works. And it's a consistent through line that I'm having in these conversations with you experts within the sales industry, is that everything just seems to come back to finding out what their problem is and just talking about that. And no one again, Richard was like, no one gives a shit about the color of your product and what it looks like and a demo. They just don't care. They just want to know how you're going to help them out, solve their problem, save them money so that they can take the kids on holiday next year.
Exactly. And they don't want to lose their job. So one of the other things I teach a lot, I cover a lot of kind of like sales fundamentals with SDRs, because oftentimes the onboarding plan for an SDR is here's a product, here's a demo, here's an ICP document, here's our call script, here's our emails, go. But they don't necessarily understand what the market is, what the challenges are, and also why people buy in the first place. And in the majority of any interaction, the majority of people buy to avoid loss or pain. And we just need to remember that. And we might think that, oh, we're selling a procurement ERP system, blah, blah, blah. It's still to avoid problem or to avoid a risk. So what's the risk of not having that? Or what's the risk of doing it ineffectively? How much money will they lose? How much time will they lose? How much stress will that cause? It's not all about, oh, you'll gain 20% of your time back, because that just doesn't sound as powerful as here are the things that you can avoid. Now, of course, you can't be like too negative with all of that. You still have to frame it in a positive way. But if we remember that people are motivated to act to avoid loss or pain, I've got to go to the dentist. I've got a cracked tooth. It's not hurting right now. I haven't booked the dentist. I know I should be booking that dentist. The moment it starts to hurt, I'm going to call the dentist. Actually, I'm going to write that down because I do need to book that in. But it's a great example. Like a lot of the things that are true in our internal and like personal lives are still true in the workplace. It's just that we call it B2B sales and B2C sales, but there's a lot of crossover. I'm literally writing dentist down on my on my list.
No, but that also summed up perfectly the idea between, right now it's a stone in your shoe. It's not quite the nail in your foot yet. But as soon as it starts hurting, then it's a nail, and you're like, shit. It creates urgency, right? Exactly. So sometimes the problem creates urgency by itself. You said AI has added complexity, not clarity. While we're kind of talking about tools, talk to me about AI and how that's affected the industry of the last few months. Like I said, this is like a conversation we're having over and over again. And I know, people listening are maybe fed up of hearing it, but every time I have this conversation, someone provides a new insight. So yeah, how can organizations, utilize these tools to make life smoother, what are you seeing as you work with these organizations in the way that they're using it?
Yeah, I've got a big opinion on the AI SDR, and every company that I've worked with has tried an AI SDR, and then they stopped using the AI SDR. And the main reason for that is an AI SDR essentially automates an already broken process. So if you weren't doing if you weren't successfully doing outbound manually or with a team of people using some technology, of course, and that wasn't generating the meetings booked, then putting a super AI on top of that and doing the same things isn't going to help. So I think what I see the best teams or the best organizations leveraging AI, and also I disagree with some of the tools out there. They're not AI, it's automation. It's like this happens, then do that. But without going too deep on that one, the organizations that are using it to free up reps times are the ones that are seeing the biggest impact. So whether that's account scoring and account tiering, whether that's preparing some call notes before a discovery call or qualification call, whether that's helping just segment the list of prospects. One of the companies I worked with, my suggestion was they were calling through a list with not random job titles. They were the right job titles, but their product could serve so many different personas. So they would be having a conversation with a marketing person, then a salesperson, then a finance person, somebody in legal. And what we ended up doing was using industry specific call days and then persona specific blocks within those call days. So one day they focused just on, they had a huge TAM with lots of different markets, but they would focus on retail and hospitality, I think. And then they would call the different personas an hour at a time. That way the sales reps were able to get a lot better and actually start to pattern match with what was working for one VP of retail location versus another. And then with confidence, they're saying, yeah, actually, I've spoken to a few people today who said this is also a challenge, but this is what they tried to do. Does that sound like something that similar to you, or is that something that resonates with you? So emails and messaging, don't let AI completely write it from scratch, but help you kind of get it 80% of the way there and you put the 20% on top. Cool frameworks and talking points, automating the CRM and updates so that your reps don't have to, using AI to help like craft post-call summaries as well. I think another one too is finding data and enriching data too. If the majority of reps that I've worked with, they use a CRM that doesn't have up-to-date data, I don't think it's a dirty secret. We all know that the data in CRM is never as good as the people say it is. But having a button that you could press, which then goes off and finds the data, checks if that person's still in the right company, puts it back into the CRM for you with their updated details, is really valuable. That's maybe a 15-step process that a sales rep would have to do manually, which can be done by a click of a button once you've got it set up. So some investment needs to go into building out those enrichments and that automation. And then I think I often get this, Sandy, that Mark, that sounds great, but my company isn't investing in technology. So my first answer is we'll leave and find a company that does invest in technology. My second answer is, well, there's certain things that you can do. Now, of course, be mindful of the security implications of giving confidential information to any LLM. No matter how secure it says it is, it could always get hacked. But there are things that you can do from a market and industry or persona level that can really help you. And it's the same things. Like, what are the talking points that this person in this type of company might be interested in? What challenges are they facing? What are the trends in the industry? What are the threats in the industry? There is so much that you can do. And I'm actually working on a new video for Google's Notebook LM. Have you played around with that at all, Sandy?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't.
It's you may have seen it a few months ago. Is you basically can give it sources of data. So let me take the example I'm going to use is Amplitude, the product analytics company, because a lot of people know it. I don't work for them, but I try and use examples that people understand. I could say HubSpot, but everybody uses those. Amplitude, I've got the industry benchmarks of product analytics, the product analytics market share, everything about product analytics. There's about 5 different reports. You put them into Google Notebook LM as a source, and then you can basically click audio. I don't know what audio description or audio overview, and it turns that source into almost like a mini podcast like this. And it's 2 people discussing what the industry report says. You can do it for books as well, and I'm not sure whether I should do that for a book because I'm effectively stealing the author's IP and ideas. But
Mm.
you can put a book called Problem Prospecting, which is I highly recommend this book, and it will basically have two people debating the main points in that book, and it's usually like a 15-minute or a 20-minute audio summary that you can listen to. Now, if a rep did that for any industry, or if the sales management and leadership built that for the reps as they joined, that would be great. But you can't just sit there and expect to be like hand fed all of the answers. So go off on your by yourself and do it. Use ChatGPT or Claude to help you understand your market more. Help help you develop your understanding of like what is important and what isn't. What are the risks? What are the changes? What are the challenges? What's good? What's working? Like you can do all that again without giving your internal IP and your internal documents to the LLMs.
I guess it's just using it. It's kind of still the passenger and not quite the pilot yet. And I think that's where I think maybe some people go wrong, is they assume that you have to use it like the pilot. Maybe the passenger is maybe the wrong way of saying it, but they're it's still cabin crew rather than actually flying the plane.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot as well with AI specifically. So not thinking automation, but it's all about context. So if you go to any AI, and say write me an email, it's going to write you an email, but it doesn't know why.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the next level is write me a first email to the VP of the head of people because I want to book a meeting with them. So it'll write an email which is trying to book a meeting with the VP of people. But then if you give it actual proper context, which is this is my solution, put in the name of your company. I'm trying to reach out to the VP of people at Google, which is a huge, huge company, of course. The challenges that we solve for X and Y. Now write a message which talks about the challenges, how we've helped, and then try and book a meeting. That's not a perfect prompt, by the way, but you'll get a much better version of an email than you would if you just said, write me an email. So it's all about context. And what's great, and I think a lot of SDRs, again, I'm talking about SDRs mostly because they're the people that I interact with, other
That's
than
good.
they're not the decision maker who bring me in, but I work with a lot of them, is that they don't realize, and I only know this now looking back over a career of 15 years, is like everything that I've done, I've learned from, and I've taken that into my next role. And it's shortened the learning curve for me. And every conversation that a sales rep has with a prospect is making them better 1% at a time. And you might not realize that until 2 years later or 3 years later. Like I'm referencing my military manager. I worked with him 10 years ago, but I still remember the lessons that I had, and that still impacts and influences my behavior and activity today. So yeah, no one's going to die, and play the long game, because whilst you work in sales for this company right now, you're probably not going to work there until you retire. That's just the reality. So play the long game.
Seems as good a place as any to end. Mark, thank you for coming on, sharing all your wisdom, insights. Where can people go if they want to find out more about what you get up to?
Yeah, sure. My website is yellowo.co.uk. I really regret that name now, having to say it in Portuguese. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Mark Colgan. There's not too many of us. There's a karate champion and a musician. It's neither of those. It's the sales guy.
I love that. I recently realized I'm the only Sandy Clunas. I've got a weird name. I'm the only Sandy Clunas on LinkedIn, and there's one other Sandy Clunas on Facebook, and he's an Inuit. He lives in Quebec. He
No
looks
way.
like a
You
yeah,
should go and meet him.
I know. I thought about adding him before and being like, because I'm from Scotland, and Clunas is a clan name and stuff. So
Okay.
there must be some sort of connection a few hundred years ago and stuff. So I would like to find out why there's a load of Clunases in Quebec. But yeah, pretty cool. Anyway, I know we're very off topic there, but that was a bit of fun. Guys, thank you all for listening. We hope you've taken as much away from it as I have. Mark, thank you for coming on and sharing your time and your wisdom with us. And yeah, we will see you all for the next one.
Cheers, Sandy. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Great questions.